Welcome, everyone. This is the January 11th meetup of the NMRA-PCR Coast Division. Want to go through real quickly a few formal items, then get into a general discussion. So first off, a few upcoming events. Um, we have the Bay Area SIG weekend, which is the 29th to 31st. This will be up in Sacramento. I actually just signed up for it. Um, Not bad. You do have to travel up to Sacramento. I got a great rate on a Motel 6 close by. We'll look a little bit at Airbnbs if anybody's interested, but that's a great event. So if you haven't registered for that, go ahead and register. I think it's $40 for the physical event up in Sacramento and it's held at the California State Railroad Museum. And on Friday afternoon, Charlie Getz is going to be doing a tour of the NMRA exhibit there, so that'll be nice. The Coast Winter Meet is scheduled for February 15th. I know that I know that David's working madly on getting a couple of clinics. We'll get started on doing layout tours. So if you've got a layout in the North Bay and you're looking at this, send me an email if you'd like to be open. And also, Jesse is driving a square foot challenge. So if you haven't started on your square foot challenge, it's time to get started on it. So that it's no time to lose. Unfortunately, I'm building modules right now and control panels. I'll show you guys in a little while when we're talking about what we're doing. So I'm probably going to skip it. I thought about it and I decided I don't have the energy to do both.
But I'm
Uh,
building a module also. It's just 12 by 12.
exactly.
Jesse.
But
Come
the problem is
on.
the problem is it looks really small in my game room.
I
Um,
know.
And the other thing is that, the PCR convention is at the end of March in San Luis Obispo. It should be a lot of fun. We might want to have a discussion once we get done here and talk a little bit about whether we want to try to put together a group train trip down and back. I'm not sure whether you need a car or lots of cars there. So if we had some shared cars, you might be able to have some folks take the train. So that's really all I had in terms of future events that are on the plan. But I did want to talk a bit about events. There's a great discussion that's been happening on the PCRgroups.io about kind of future events. And so, from perspective of what we've been trying to do in the Coast Division is have two auctions annually, typically right before Christmas and then in May. So they're about 6 months apart. Um, We've been doing the auctions at the senior center in Alameda. Quite frankly, the senior center's gotten a little bit more expensive, and it's now to the point where it's about $600 to rent the space. And we on the last auction made a little over 300 on the auction, so the auction actually now is not profitable. I've heard comments about, well, couldn't we do an auction in the South Bay? We get more people. I don't know of a location. If someone knows of a potential location where we could have it, that's a senior center or a church or someone who would let us have it there. As I understand it, the financial transaction part of this limits it in some spaces where you're not allowed to do that. But if someone knows of a location, give me a call or contact because currently we'll probably continue to do it at the senior center. It's a nice location, easy access in and out. But there are two disadvantages right now. It limits the number of people because it's in Alameda. So a lot of the South Bay folks may decide not to drive up. The other issue, of course, is the cost. So we will plan to continue to have two auctions every year. Again, right before Christmas, and then in the late fall, late spring, in May. We have been kind of moved to this north-south events. We've been doing events at the South Bay Railroad Historical Society, typically in September. I think we've done three of those now. Um, we we've been planning on having a North Bay event after we started the South Bay event. We didn't do that last year because of the convention, but this year that's scheduled in February. So the advantage to those is we can do that at the South Bay Railroad Historical Society, at the Golden State Model Railroad Museum, which obviously being model railroad clubs are the two clubs in the area that have relatively large meeting spaces as part of their facilities. And we've been actually generously offered to use those for our meetups twice a year. need to define what the field trips are. I'm going to look into trying to get us into that the BART we were looking at trying to get into for the convention, see if we can do that one. If anyone has a location they'd like to go, let me know. One of the suggestions and thoughts is Rio Vista, up to the museum up there, and set a day up. Actually,
Nothing's playing near us. The
this
blue
year,
list, nothing's playing. Okay. So we won't.
this year, Red actually did an event up there, so I think that would be a great event to go do if there's interest in that. So that's one thing I'd really like to talk about is, are there kind of field trip events, which is going to a location typically in the morning, maybe having a lunch there or something like at the up at Rio Vista, and then maybe having some layouts open in the afternoon. And then the discussion online was a couple of interesting things. One was, a long range trip, something that was an overnight trip somewhere that, to my mind might be up to, Carson City or something like that, or somewhere up in the Sierras. Jamestown, for example, maybe set up a special event at Jamestown for us. And then kind of a suggestion around a concept of trains and coffee. Rich Jorgensen suggested we do a heat map of members. I think in the end, what we're going to find is that there's kind of an East Bay concentration in the Northeast Bay, up in the Berkeley area on that side of the bay. Definitely a South Bay concentration, maybe a little bit out here in the Tri Valleys. But that's an interesting thought, and that would be one where someone wanted to take on, maybe organizing one of those, picking a location and having a trains and coffee kind of event. Any comments, thoughts on those ideas, or any other ideas for events and things we could consider doing?
Um, Phil, I think that the thought that comes to mind is mini meets, where,
Yep.
for example, now we have the layout the operations special interest group and their big events. But if we want to have smaller local gatherings where somebody wants to say, hey, I'll have a few people, I have openings for a few people come over for an operating session on my railroad where it's just us, sort of thing. I'd be glad to have 3 or 4 people come over to my layout and make fun of it and my ideas of how to operate it, for example. And I know there are other guys that have layouts where it would be not such a big thing, but just hey, next Saturday, there's a open house for members. We can take so many people, sign up with Dave Gibbons, or I'll name Seth Newman, or Jesse Walden, just if a few guys. It's just a chance to get together on a less organized formal basis than a big SIG operation sort of thing. And that's something I'd be glad to host. I don't know about other guys.
I started this discussion, if you will. Actually, it wasn't meant as a discussion. It was meant more as just me generating a list. And I've gotten really interesting responses, and I've gotten some directly to me that never showed up on the website. And what I'm going to do is put together call it a report, and post it or submit it to Phil or something like that, because there's a lot of things that I had never thought of when I said, tell me what you want to do.
Right.
Some of them were the things that Phil has already mentioned, and that sort of thing. So I think that this was, as an activity, asking was a great idea. It got people to think, and it got people to come up with. The other thing, since you already mentioned it, I got a bunch of feedback that there aren't enough auctions.
Oh,
People want more auctions, not less. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because, and I'm not picking on you, Phil, but Phil was whining last week about, oh, nobody showed up at the auction, and oh, woe is us. Rightly speaking, though, there was several people, both on the chat and independently that felt, whoa, I really like these auctions. And one suggestion was, you know what? Increase the cut to the Coast Division. Now, I have no idea how you run an auction. I have no idea what our cut is, but I do know that we're supposedly trying to make some money there. So, I'll have something probably for the next meeting before then that I'll send out or whatever.
But you might put the fee up to $5 just to put something in.
Yeah,
So
Certainly,
let me talk to that real quick. So currently, the auction has two parameters that I think we can think about. The first is the percentage that the Coast Division takes of the sale amount. So currently that's 10%. So if you sell an item for $1, you get 90 cents back. The seller pays $1, the buyer pays $1, the seller gets 90 cents, the coast gets 10%, 10 cents. If you sell a $20 locomotive, the coast gets $2. So that's something we can talk about. We did talk about increasing that to 15% at one point. Clearly, if we can squeeze it to 20%, we would have a much easier way of covering our costs. So that's kind of a cost, primarily what I would call a cost driver. Think about these as knobs, right? So like any business, you have knobs that control profitability, call it, and kind of the operation of the business. That's one knob. There's another knob, which is actually something that is kind of a personal peeve of mine, which is related to something you guys probably know. I wrote a book. One of the chapters of the book is called Skin in the Game. And it's the concept that in any relationship, both parties need to have skin in the game, where, in other words, they have some value constraint on the outcome of the event. So, if you and I don't have both value on the outcome of the event, we're not going to work to make the event happen. So, the story I always used to tell people was I was kind of the local leader of a very large company. We used to do these huge picnics every year down at one of those picnic places down off of Highway 9. And, the company would give us an amount of money to pay for picnic. So we got so much for employee for quote unquote social programs for the employees. And every year we'd have meetings to plan the picnic. And it would start off with someone saying, why do you guys charge for the picnic? So what we do is we charge $10 an employee and $20 a family to come to the picnic. And we always had to explain to people, we take that money and we put it into a pool, and they buy basically gifts that are given away in a drawing during the event. So there's this big, giveaway, and you can win a TV and stuff. And the money, the $10 and $20 goes into that fund and buys that stuff. And some of the HR people would do that. But the reason for the $10 and $20 is not to get money to do that. It's to have the employees have skin in the game. And the reason is, so when you wake up Saturday morning of the day of the picnic, and your wife says, let's go to the beach today, you say, no, we bought tickets to the event. We already paid for them. We have skin in the game. And so, to me, it's a very interesting concept of, whenever you're doing something with someone in life, do you both have skin in the game? By the way, it's why I think everybody should work. You need to have skin in the game. The country and the economy is skin in the game. So the perspective here is, the problem with the auction is the seller doesn't have skin in the game. So if I bring an item in and I take an item that you and I look at and we say, gee, that's 4 cars with horn hook couplers, and you price it at $10, it's not going to sell. You don't have skin in the game if it doesn't sell, but it takes time at the auction. So from my perspective, the auction has two costs. One is the cost of the facility. The second is the cost of the volunteers' time to process and go through everything. And by the way, that's been, between us, the biggest issue with the auction is getting volunteers to volunteer ahead of time, to be able to have a bit of a training session so that it goes smoothly. The crew that used to do it from the Walnut Creek Club, have to a great extent moved on in their lives, etc. So, one of the questions is, do we charge a listing fee? Do you, for example, when you list a item, and I don't know that it's a huge number, But if you list an item, does it cost you 50 cents? So in other words, if you want to have auction cards, the auction cards cost a quarter or they cost 50 cents. So if you want 10 auction cards, it costs $5. You can now list those items, but you don't get the $5 back if they don't sell. So, one of the things is I'd be more than glad if folks would like to. Jer's not here. Jer's kind of been driving the auction operations, but if someone would like to get involved and kind of take on that and think about it, I think it's something we definitely could consider how we do it a little differently. So I actually wanted to, having said all that, let me close this other thing I had open and let me open up something else. So this was just to give you guys an idea of, so we did this, and I would, by the way, very much suggest, Jesse, that we should do this again after you get your report done and use your report as the genesis for doing this activity again. So this was from 2000, right in the end of 2020. And what we did was we did a survey. Some of you may remember this. We got 72 responses, which is a 20% response rate, which is very, very significant. So this was kind of the output of that survey. So again, this is a few years old, but we can replicate it, and I hope we get a similar responses. So, this was how many Coast events have you attended in 2018 and 2019? Those were, by the way, auctions. All of those events were auctions. So these were 8 auctions. So you can see kind of, about 16% attended all of them. About 20% of the respondents never attended. If you look at it in terms of totals here, about half the population were regular auction goers. About half were not regular auction goers. It's kind of one good way to look at that slide. If you did not attend, why not? I'm not going to go through this in detail, but there was a lot of, you can kind of see conflicts. One of the problems we have is that generally to get inexpensive places, we had this with the Boy Scouts. That was exclusively a Sunday facility. It turned out the Elks was better on Sunday, and the senior club, senior center in Alameda, we're able to get it on Sunday because they don't have senior events on Sunday. So obviously doing things on Sunday, anyone who has a high church commitment on Sunday, that's the problem. So that's why that one I think is so high. So people also said day of the week conflict on Sunday. So, before 2018, how often did you attend Coast events? Have you participated in the auction? Yes. How often should we have physical events? Pretty much the 4 per year seemed to be kind of a general agreement that was about right. So this is the chart I really wanted to show everyone, because this to me was the most interesting chart. So this is actually all the events that we asked people about if they'd be interested in doing. And what they did was they responded based on which ones were most important to them, which ones were not very interesting to them. So, and you were not limited how many most important you could choose. So you could say everything was most important. So that really wasn't the way it worked. So you can kind of see the responses. This is actually the interesting way to look at that kind of data, is you do what's called a weighted value analysis. So you take anybody who said something was most important, you give it 10 points, down to 0 points for not interesting. You add up the total weighted value. And this was kind of where things fell in terms of interest. So, clinics came out number 1, layout tours were number 2, model displays were number 3, field trips were 4. We'd only done 1 field trip at that point, so that's probably maybe a little questionable as an operations number 5, and the auction came out 6th, and modular setups came out 7. So, I think this is what I think we might want to do is replicate that and add in some of the things, Jesse, that you found. And but it was, for me, it was kind of eye-opening that I think we've got a very strong core of folks that really like the auction, but there are a lot of folks that don't see the auction. So part of the logic of going to the 2 and 2, 2 North Bay, South Bay events and 2 auctions a year was trying to kind of have better coverage across our entire community. So I don't know, probably more data than you wanted on a Saturday morning. I'll apologize for that. But anyway, I think Jesse, what I'd love to do is take your input. I love the initiative and putting that out. That was great. Why you should take on the role. It's it's if you look at it from the perspective of what we can do, it's really up to us. And one of the things is, if somebody wants to do an event, I mean, if you want to do a trains and coffee, just talk about it. We'll figure it out and advertise it. Going back to what David said, if somebody wants to have an open house, just decide to have an open house. It doesn't need it. If you want to have an operating session, I mean, so the one challenge I have with operating sessions is it's a historical challenge. Unfortunately, apparently, and I had no background in this other than kind of hearsay, long-term hearsay, is at some point when operations became a thing, the NMRA didn't embrace it. And it actually evolved organizationally outside the NMRA. And so like there's an operations website where you can list your operating sessions and that kind of stuff. If we want to put anything like that, if somebody says, hey, Saturday, I'd like to do an open house on a Saturday. If any member wants to do an open house on a Saturday, tell me and we'll put it in the newsletter. I mean, I'll put it in, it'll come out in the Coast Extra every week. We'll put it on the website. We'll put it in the calendar. I think there's no reason not to promote activities that someone wants to do that the membership is welcome to attend. If someone's got an in at any of the locations, any kind of prototype or activity that would be good, just tell me and say, hey, I've got an in here. I mean, that's between us, that's how we got into Redwood Valley. The reason we went up to Redwood Valley was that John says, hey, my son works there, we can get in. So go ahead, Jesse. I'm sorry.
It's just I want to support your statement. I know this is strange, but I want to support your statement. This 1 foot challenge foolishness that we're trying to get to run in a month. This item was, I mentioned to Phil, I said, hey, Phil, we ought to do this again. And he said, you want to do it? Do it. And I happen to have the materials. And this all of a sudden got a life of its own. And as a plug for the 1 foot challenge, the background today is part of my 1 foot challenge. This is what, it's not going to quite look like that, but it'll look something like that, at least where the buildings are. But anyway, the point was that getting it advertised is easy. It's just having one person say, I want to do this or something like that. And there's at least 2 or 3 people that would help if that was it. It doesn't all have to be done by Phil, and it doesn't all have to come down from above.
Yeah, and this can be very informal. Like I said, if someone says, hey, I haven't had my layout open in a while, I'd like to have my layout open, we'll publicize it and put it in there, and I'll put up a blurb that says, hey, this layout's going to be open in 2 weeks, and it'll be in there. And to me, actually, I'd love to have more of those things in the Coast Extra. And the reason is, the more topical stuff that's in there, the more higher the probability is that people will read it. Right. My one concern with the Coast Extra is people feel like it's the same stuff every week. So you just kind of start ignoring it. And then somebody says, oh, I didn't know we had an event happening. And it's like, it's been on the Coast Extra for a month. Well, I just didn't happen to look at it because I saw it and didn't open it up. So, if anyone wants to do that, absolutely. The other thing we can do, guys, there's lots of interesting things we can do because we have some reasonable technology to put things up online and stuff as well. So,
the branch line, by the way, the branch line was surprisingly helpful in terms of the 1 foot challenge. I
Yep.
mean, they just love filling up their pages.
Yep. No, exactly. By the way, there was a reference in the branch line, and I didn't put a response in this on the PCR, and I need to. I think it must have been some sort of vestige of a past document about a train show at the Crane Center, and there was in the branch line in the schedule. I think it was in there, so I do not believe, based on what it's on the GTS site, that there is a show at the train center this year.
It's going to be tough with the middle of the pickleball courts.
Yep. Well, it was just I think it was there like in 2018 or 19, and
It
I have a
was.
funny feeling that in the editing something that was there got left, and so no big deal. But anyway, no. So we will continue on that. Like I said, I'm going to take what we get from Jesse. But if anybody has any ideas and would like to contribute them, like I said from David, we can put up you put up a members. Maybe make even a separate section in the Coast Extra that's called members events, where if somebody wants to have, I remember like the open house we had, the Garden Railroad one. That was a good one, right at Joyce's house. That's the kind of thing to put in there, whenever anybody has an open. I know, by the way, I think Baggers does a very good job of this within the Garden Railroad community, of people having open houses and it just being advertised as an open house. And in fact,
Joyce was telling me she was Baggers, the Bay Area Garden Railroad people, are really very annoyed at us, Coast Division, because we will not help them with their newsletter or distribute it or something like that. And she said, there's a lot of, we were talking about younger members, and she said there's a lot of younger people in Baggers that probably would easily transition into model railroading or be interested in it. And I'm just going to pass that on to you, Phil, because she was really upset.
So one of the challenges I've had is I've never been able to engage with the Baggers people. I mean, I've kind of suggested it a couple of times, and so I will ping Joyce and say, whomever there, let's have a call and have a meeting and have a discussion about what we want to do. I have absolutely no problem doing a much closer integration with Baggers.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, David.
Jesse, I have to call you out here. Trying to saying Baggers to get Baggers interested in model railroading, they are model railroaders.
Oh, yes, you're right. You're right.
Okay,
you're right.
just
sorry.
Watch out there. And as the National Model Railroad Association, they are our brothers and sisters, right? So that's just for what it's worth. But what that does indicate is your concern, Jesse, is valid, that they're another bunch of model railroaders, and so they need to be they're part of our family.
Yeah.
As unlikely as it may be looking at us and looking at them. I think Mr. Adams wants the floor.
Yeah, I just want to add there are two other groups. There's a Train Collectors Association, mostly Lionel folks, and there's also the RPM, the Railroad Prototype Modelers. They're outside NMRA, partly because they just didn't get the right attention.
Right. And of those, what's interesting is, if you know the concept of a Venn diagram, and talk about a Venn diagram overlap of interest, my argument would be that the RPM is the most overlapped Venn diagram of those two. Right? As you get to the Garden Railway, I found that there's much less overlap between them.
But it's still there.
Why would you say that, Phil?
No, I say it because I'm not being negative. I'm talking about this is purely, it's purely from a reality perspective. If I am a true Garden Railroader and I am building my track on concrete in my backyard, running G-scale locomotives, my scenery is all real plants, and my rock work is done in concrete measured in yards, there's so little correlation of activities with building a traditional in-building on bench work model railroad. I mean, there's just not a lot of correlation between the two activities. The only correlation is the structures. And then you realize, oh, if I'm building structures to go outside, they have to be built fundamentally differently than those that are going to go inside on a layout.
Excuse me,
Yes,
Phil.
and
Phil, I have to interject. I think you could say the same thing about people who model with Lionel.
Well,
that feels different.
I'm saying it's a spectrum. It's a spectrum, right? So RPM is the closest. Garden Railway is the farthest. I think Lionel is in between. And you're right. So if you have the Lionel, if you have people that are doing what's being called high rail modeling, which is you do 3-rail modeling. And in fact, one of the things I'm trying to do, just as a side, I want to talk a little bit about clinics, but I talked to oh gosh, come on, Dennis Brennan. Does anybody know who Dennis Brennan is? Dennis Brennan is the guy who shoots most of the toy train covers. So if you see toy train magazines and you see those covers, he's the photographer. I'm going to try to get him to come do a clinic on photography. He does an amazing clinic on composition and about how to compose railroad photos, not how to take them, but how to compose what's in the lens. He does just amazing modeling, but it's 3-rail. And there's some pictures, like if it's shot below the rail so you can't see it's 3-rail, it's just as good as any of what we would call scale modeling in terms of the quality of the scenery, the structures, the look, etc. So there are a group of Lionel modelers that are much closer, and there's some that are farther away. I mean, if you're basically modeling Lionel with Lionel buildings, and that it's a lot less. So anyway, that was my only comment, is that sometimes I find it's hard to interest people in our events because we don't have a lot to offer that correlates to their hobby activity.
may I add something to that, Phil?
Sure.
Ken, let me sneak in front of you. The thing is, Phil, it's due to the not even limitations, but the nature of the scales and activities. Your techniques and materials are different, but the goal of conveying to yourself, to people who are operating or viewing the railroad, there's many techniques that span all across what we're talking about. And they're all model railroads. And different techniques, different methods, different materials, but we still try to get across a message somehow in the way that we do our work. And often ideas cross-pollinate. We see something the Garden Railway person does, and we go, that idea could translate to what I'm doing on my HO layout, and so on around. But just to widen our tent, make our tent bigger. That's my motivation in saying this. I think Ken has hand up.
Okay, let me just put one thing on for the RPM people. The true RPMer dispenses with the layout. They build models.
Yeah.
Usually of equipment or buildings or whatever, but they build modeling. It's the actual end of their game.
Right. So I think again, so I agree with you, David, at kind of a religious outlook. Yet we're all model railroaders.
Yeah.
I'm coming back to the much more pragmatic effect of saying, like, if we correlate as two groups and we do things together, but convincing someone who's an RPM member to join the NMRA, that's really what I'm getting down to. Right. Convincing somebody who's a baggers member. I'm a baggers member. I have a Garden Railway. It's in my backyard. There's not a single non-living plant on it. So, it's a very different sort of thing. Convincing that person they should become an NMRA member and go to NMRA events and go to the auction is a very different thing. So that I agree with you at one level.
Yeah.
Like when you talk to the world and you say, oh, we're all model railroads, it's kind of a little bit like the military modelers, right? I could say we're all we're all modelers, right? We all model reality. But military modelers, it's going to be hard to convince them to become NMRA members.
Right.
Because the topic, and and by the way, I would argue, I think Ken made a great point. I would argue a significant percentage of the RPM modelers are closer to military modelers than they
Yeah.
are to what we would consider traditional model railroaders. And I'm not being negative at all. This is
Right,
kind
right.
of like any reality. Perception is reality. Positioning is reality. Who you are is reality. So I think what I'd love to do with baggers is do some correlation between the two. I would absolutely love to do some, membership. I had a commitment when the baggers convention was on. I had a commitment last year. There's a baggers convention. I believe they're going to do it, or not baggers. There's a Garden Railroad convention in Sacramento. I mean, one of the things I think we talked about was doing an NMRA booth there
Hmm.
and having it and seeing if we could, do some things at their convention to convince people to come over. But absolutely would love to do some, cross correlation of events between the two. I really haven't found the interest on that side when I've gone and talked to them to say, okay, what could we do together? And now maybe they perceive that was me. If that was the case, that's a perception that's probably was wrong as well. But I will go back to Joyce and ask her who are the folks at Baggers I should talk to, and I will make sure we have a meeting about correlating activity. By the way, anyone who would like to be involved in being our Baggers coordinator, please step forward. Maybe I'll ask Joyce, but it really is the idea of someone to correlate between. So, I know Baggers has these fairly regularly. They have open layouts they announce. Just somebody has their layout open for the day. I mean, I would love to communicate that to our group. On the other
Phil,
hand,
if we had announcements about their activities, I, for one, would love to go and see again to learn what I can from their different perspective in my modeling. And if we show up at their events and express an interest and appreciate what they're doing, then that invites them coming to stuff that we do. And
right,
I would say that putting our hand forward in that way would help.
But in the end, then you come down to the real question. And this is I always extrapolate to the end. That's kind of been my role in life. After they come to 3 of our events, if they're a Baggers member, do we ask them to join the NMRA or not come again? Or does being a Baggers member entitle you to all the benefits of NMRA membership locally? And that's the question we'll have to come down to, right? Because if you assume, again, back to the Venn diagram, that we have a reasonably small overlap of members. So assume that half the Baggers members are not NMRA members. Are we suggesting that we open all of our events up to all Baggers members, regardless of whether they're NMRA members? I'm not looking for an answer to that question, but those are the questions you have to ask about how you have these two organizations work together. Like I said, the idea of using this as a mechanism to recruit Baggers members to be NMRA members works at one level. There's the next level down that says, well, we typically have a policy that says after you attend 3 events, we ask you to become a member. And the reason for that is most of the value, to my mind, of NMRA membership is local. And if you can do all those local NMRA things without being an NMRA member, then why would anybody ever be an NMRA member? Then we're just a local club. So I think we have to kind of go through that thought process correlation as we do this.
If there is a mutual or an exchange of participation where they say, yeah, you guys, if we can come to your stuff, you can come to our stuff.
Yes.
Where there's a
that works out really well for us, but it doesn't work out very well for national.
Who cares? In a sense,
there are people. Anyway, guys, I don't want to make. I'm saying to you the complexity of.
I understand, but trying to get national to do something is an uphill battle, right? What if we had? I like the idea. What you're suggesting is an affiliate type membership. All right.
Yep.
So now, a Baggers person can attend a bunch of events. Maybe there's even an exchange of funds to help cover things like insurance and all the other overhead crap that you need to do for some of these things. But to me, making the tent bigger is way better than what you're suggesting, Phil, which is making the tent smaller and saying, you're not scale, you don't belong, or you're not. You don't use the same materials, you don't belong. I mean, I'm not for that. I would rather. I mean, Ray Turner. Right? Ray Turner's got a beautiful outdoor garden railroad, right?
Yep.
he tries to get stuff to scale. He's part of, he does a lot of operations. He
Yep.
flows back and
And
forth
he's an
happily
NMRA
between.
member. He's
Exactly. So why
part of the
not?
Yeah.
He's part of the Venn diagram. So I think there's more overlap than you may be considering, and having these groups be able to share events. Why not have Garden Railroad stuff at an auction? So so a lot of guys have different stuff in different scales. You might see something in G scale that you'd like to put on a shelf that shows up
Well,
at an auction.
that's the interesting question: is do we at a local level just decide it makes more sense to partner, even though it may not be the best thing for national? I'm just telling you the concerns that will come up at some levels for doing some of these things. So we
Yeah,
have to manage those things.
I would just want to mention something about bringing in people from other groups and the auction specifically. One of the challenges I have with the auction is that my scale isn't well represented. So I do ON30. I'd love any O scale structures, but I imagine that there's just not a lot of garden rail. I mean, as little, it's all HO and N pretty much. And if I want to buy a book, that's a good place to go. But one of the challenges about the auction as a draw for other groups is understanding whether or not people in those scales actually have something to come to. And so,
Well, I think the interesting thing. So ON30, the reason we don't see a lot of ON30 at the auction is just the volume in overall in the hobby. But if the thought process, this is actually an interesting auction thought process. I got to think there's two dimensions to this. One is if we partnered with baggers for the auction
Can I?
and we got, yeah,
I was once a bagger without a backyard. And I was trying to, with a very small group of that large scale people in F scale, which is prototype 20.3 scale to reality, build equipment to RPM standards.
Mm.
I split from the baggers. They just, there was no interest as organizationally on their part for real scale equipment built in large scale.
but coming back to the auction, I think the auction could be an interesting thought process to talk to them about, which is if baggers members brought stuff to the auction to sell and came to the auction and buy, it could potentially increase the volume at the auction overall, which would be good for us in terms of that. The one thing I need to be really considerate on is there's one of the reasons we limit the auction to NMRA members is that there's a background which I have never investigated. I have taken on faith that this is true, that if you are members of an organization, the sales tax rules don't apply. The problem is if a member of the public comes into the auction and buys something, according to state law, we're supposed to get sales tax on that item.
Not true.
That's
The
my understanding.
reporting of sales tax
I understand.
by a 501c3 is the responsibility of the 501c3, and because of the reality, you don't have to. You can charge sales tax, and you should charge sales tax on every purchase. But are these purchases?
Right.
Or are these exchanges?
That's because they're members.
Nobody's going to audit us. So that's not a valid
again, they're
concern.
considered member exchange, but on the other hand, if we partner with baggers and said it was only open to baggers members and NMRA members, then we could argue the same thing applies. So
No, I would worry more about insurance. Are we open to the general public? If we are, then therefore our insurance is supposedly covering an accident at the auction.
Right. My understanding with our insurance is we partner, for example, with the OPSA or the LDSIG when they do their event, and it's covered by the NMRA insurance because of that partnership. So
right now, who covers the insurance on a Coast auction that's open to the general public?
Well, since we haven't ever had one that's open to the general public, but the
Oh,
auction,
okay. Then I don't know.
right. The auction insurance currently, we've generated an insurance certificate from National to the senior center to cover that. There is not really that big of a thing about it having to be just members, because there are other NMRA events that don't have just members in them. But let me see first, before we get into a lot of things about the operational details. I think the question to ask the baggers folks and is, would you guys be interested in participating? We can pick an auction. We have an auction coming up probably in May. If there's interest, we can open up. We can say it's going to be a co-auction. We'll open up with baggers and have them come. I think that would be a fun way to expand the auction, potentially bring more things in, bring more people in. I'm very open to kind of anything. Between us personally at a local level, I'd be open to 100% federation with them. I only brought up the thing about the membership because that will become a comment eventually by someone. Anyway, enough said. I think those are great concepts. And Rich is here. Rich and I been talking about doing a heat map of where members are, so you can kind of do some of these local events. But if anyone would like to do an event at a local restaurant or something in their area, one of the things is we can sort the membership and go figure out the folks that are local and close, or we can just put it in the Coast Extra and say, hey, in San Leandro at Joe's Coffee House at this Thursday afternoon or Thursday for lunch at Chili's, there's going to be a meetup, and see who shows up.
Yep.
People still have chilies.
Yeah, that's true. I read an interesting article about what they called fast casual dining, and basically what it says is there's become a real bifurcation in essentially dining out, where people either go for really cheap fast food, or they want to go to an experiential restaurant. And those restaurants in the middle, like Red Lobster and that really you wouldn't call them an experience, but they're better than going to McDonald's, that those have been really challenged here in the past couple of years. That's why you've seen so many bankruptcies, and that's basically, and they said it's actually the problem is an underlying change in the demographics of how people eat out, that people either eat out just to fulfill their food needs, or they actually want something that's more experiential, so they go to a higher end restaurant. And those mid-level, the Applebee's and Red Lobsters and those kind of places have been very challenged just because of the change of how people's eating habits are. I thought that was interesting.
I have a story to tell. It's part of the story about the railroad that I will be building. And the section of the railroad I want to tell you about, and a portion of that section of the railroad, can be found here. Okay, do you see the California and Oregon Coast Railway Company map?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Do you guys see a map?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I
All right.
in
In the world that I am modeling, this railroad succeeded. It succeeded on the basis of a couple of crazy guys, salesman type, that pitched the idea of running a railroad from Grants Pass. And do you see my cursor?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, from Grants Pass up over the hill, down along the Smith River to Crescent City. This is a part of my railroad because my railroad then extends through some rough terrain to Trinidad and Eureka, and a connection to the Northwestern Pacific. It connects with the Southern Pacific, but the Southern Pacific no longer runs south of Grants Pass because Mount Shasta has destroyed the railroad and everything in a massive eruption in the early 1980s. But the part of the story I'm going to talk about and show you a bit about is the town of Tequilma here. In this world, the logging interests did not become corporate. They were family run, and they stayed on the basis of, we want to keep logging for generations. So they didn't strip mine the forests. They kept mining responsibly, or in the sense of sustainably, because they wanted future generations to make a living logging. Tequilma is a logging town on a branch line off there, but one of the scions, one of the younger generations, happens to be a rail fan, and he has money, and he likes the Southern Pacific, and so he has a railroad museum. And I'm going to show you some of the rolling stock that's at the Railroad Museum in Tequilma. Now, some of these are BS Southern Pacific, some are not. Let's see. Now, could somebody highlight the image showing the Southern Pacific center cab? How do I do that? Phil, you there? Let's see, the iPhone image, can you highlight that?
Hang on, I had to change my image of things to see. Yes, I can. Hang on. There we go.
Okay. All right, so these are part of the collection at that museum. And unlike a lot of railroad museums, this museum will not have a collection of dead, rotting, decayed, old pieces of equipment that they'll get around to fixing someday. And that's just a choice on my part, because I know the gentleman that started the museum wasn't interested in having a bunch of crummy stuff. Okay, so let's see, if I stop share here, there it is. Okay, so one of the pieces of equipment they have is this center cab. And I had a lot of fun, by the way. You can just barely see the decoder in the roof of the center cab. This took me hours of cursing to get going, but that's one piece of equipment in the museum that they have there at Tequilma. Next is Fairbanks Morse and one of their units in SP. Next is a Southern Pacific F unit, and this is an example of my trying to get DCC into one of these F units. That's I use NCE decoders pretty much everywhere, but that's the installation here with a boatload of lighting stuffed into this thing. So I've got all the lighting working in it, even a backup light.
I'd like to talk to you about the lighting.
Yeah, my light emitting diodes are my friend, and my soldering iron burns my fingers a lot, but it can be done. All right, this has, by the way, this is a scrounge blue box locomotive, and I got a dress up kit for it with all the different ladders and details and everything, and that made it a pretty nice model. I got lucky and ran into and got my hands on an Intermountain F unit done. I think this is called Black Widow, if my memory is correct, and quite a nice model. And again, after some cursing, I got DCC into it. Another Intermountain. And I'm not sure if anybody knows when the Southern Pacific stopped using these Jeep units to haul passenger cars up and down from San Francisco to San Jose. Does anybody know that part of the history? I haven't done my homework yet.
They were operational until the Caltrain took over.
Which was, is it 1980s, 1970s?
1970. The Caltrain, I think, operated some of them. It's still in SP colors. After I'd have to go through to the history of Caltrain and when they took it. Actually,
right.
1985 was
85.
According to, I just found it. Caltrain was founded in 85.
85. Okay, well, it's 1987, and somehow the museum got their mitts on one of these things. And this is another Intermountain, very nicely done model. One of the sort of models you have to pick up very carefully because all the details are so fine. They've got a logger, and that decal was done by my dear friend Steve Tester, now passed away. And I'll have to figure out logging companies up in there that might have used 262 like this. and clean it up and get it working again. It has mechanical problems and so on, but it's a memory. It's a memory of a dear friend, and so it's not going to be a Southern Pacific unit, but it bears upon logging on the North Coast. The
Not Southern Pacific on that.
Say again.
Thank you for not doing the SP on the logging Mali.
No, that's no way. I'll have to look up logging companies up there. Now, Ken, you'll probably tag me on this because I put an SP tender behind a locomotive that does not follow SP practice. As I understand it, the locomotive is following a Union Pacific.
It's if you really want to make it SP, they're in 1956. SP brought a bunch of about 10 of the St. Louis Southwest 280s to California.
Yep.
Utilized, and they look very much like these the Bachmann model.
Right. Well, that's good. That's good because this will be my one.
I'll actually tell. I think I have an article on what they call the Okies.
Okay.
In Weston, 1956.
Right. So this is my one. The museum, pardon me, what the museum has for SP steam for passengers. Don't ask how they got their hands on it, but they have about 6 or 7 of these things. The Sierra cars, which I have to do a bit of work on to get them up to NMRA standards. This one I've gotten weighted, got windows, painted and weighted and all that sort of stuff. I need to do more of them, but that's one of the excursions that are run on the line. And then my last excursion unit that's run by the museum is the SP's RDC. Now, gentlemen, I was in Saginaw, Michigan at my new home a few days ago. And in my new home, I have this. Let me get there. This, gentlemen, is what I am thinking I'm going to put in my basement. Stairs going up to the first floor of the house. Crew lounge here. And the blue is crew aisle. Purple is the main line. Green is the view block. I'm looking at using either a helix here or here to have 2 decks. And the lower deck here will swing out so you have a nod under for crew to get into the railroad. This is about 1,500 square foot of basement in Saginaw, Michigan. The goal here is to have big aisles. There is, by the way, a toilet and a slop sink here, and probably have a curtain or something. There's concrete block here, and so the railroad will tunnel through, run right next to the toilet and over the slop sink. I am very interested in getting as much mainline run as I can. There are concrete block walls here currently and here, and I'm going to have steel beam and post supports to replace them so the house doesn't collapse into the basement. But that's what I'm working on. The basement project is going to be after my wife is happy with the upstairs of the house, as you might guess. But that's what I'm going to be working on. Currently, I'm just going to be going back and forth between Hayward and Saginaw because we're still here taking care of my wife's father. He's 93 and needs a lot of care. But in time, these locomotives will be part of the Cave Junction Railway Museum there in Tacoma. And I just present it for your thoughts and amusement. And Jesse, I know you hate me because I am getting a 1,500 square foot basement.
But you're living in Saginaw.
But I'm living in Susie and I
In,
live here in Hayward.
no, is it
And but the home, we now say this is Dad's house,
right? No.
but our home is in Saginaw. And
Right.
I'm very
No,
excited. It's going to cost me a lot to get that basement livable. It's a cold tomb right now. Ugh.
that's
Anyway,
what
say on, Phil.
one of the things I always said was that if you look at Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, um, New York, lots of Pennsylvania, they have the two ideal things you have to have for lots of model railroading: basements and really lousy winter weather.
Yes,
Absolutely
exactly.
true.
I mean, it really is true. It's how many garden railways do you have in those parts of the country
Ugh.
comparatively as a percentage to here? I mean, as a relative ratio. Well,
Yeah.
since we're kind of, I'll show you what I'm working on. I have to get my background off here.
If I can be nasty just for a second, and then I have to leave.
Nasty.
In the background here, you can see how I go about laying out this 12 by 12. It's foam core. It's extruded foam. I can't figure out how to get out of the picture. Anyway, it's extruded foam, and
Turn off your camera, Jesse. Turn off your camera, and then we'll only see the
Don't
background.
mute. No, do not mute your camera. We'll just see a black background. You got to
Okay,
do
that's
just
all
what
right.
you're doing was right. That's cool.
Right. I'm over
You're
here.
right. You're
All I'm doing is saying that it's a 12 by 12 expanded foam. I've got, at this point, 3 structures, and I'm building a 4th one in this corner down here, wherever this corner is. And to lay out things, I've opted to use map pins. So though you can see the
Good idea.
roadway, and that's where the track is going to be, because you have to have one piece of track. And the interiors of all the structures are going to be detailed as best I can. And so that's what I'm a little further ahead with this. Right now I'm putting in, I'm using mat board for my bases, for my roads and things like that. And so that's where I am. And like I say, I have to get going, and I wanted to just share that little bit with you. And you're right, Dave. I really do hate you. Take care, all. Have a nice week.
You too, Jesse.
So very quickly, I am getting ready. Actually, this weekend, my plan is to build my control. I'm building a little rolling control cabinet to put my combination of an areas. I think I've shown that some switch control panel, turnout control panel, a lighting panel, and this is the last piece, which is the DCC control system. Oh, hang on, I gotta get rid of the background. I thought I got rid of the background, and I didn't. I actually left it on. There we go.
Is that 3D printed, Phil?
So this is a 3D printed panel, and basically on the back, that's the Wi-Fi tracks version of an NCE power cab base unit. So it's got Wi-Fi included. There's a switch there, and that switch will run some relays, so I can switch the output of 2 boosters into this ramp meter down here. So you can see, and what I'm doing is basically taking the output of this guy has an output, which is a couple of amps, and I'm taking that output and I'm running 2 things with it, some switches for turnouts, but then using that to provide power into 2 Tam Valley boosters. Tam Valley boosters seem really interesting. They're $50. They're a 3 amp, 5 amp booster, so 3 amp normal, 5 amp burst current, and they have a built-in circuit breaker. So basically, what you do is you just connect them to the output of a booster, and they give you a new power district. So by taking the output of the basically, I bought for NCE. You can buy for $180. You can buy a power cab, and the power cab as a control system is really no different functionally, except for the fact it doesn't have the same thing in terms of a programming track. It's very much the same as their $300, box units. And so if you take the output of that and power two of the Tam Valley boosters, you can connect them together so they're grounded, and so you've got a common ground plane for your power districts. And now for $100, you get two 3-amp power districts on a layout. And then I've got, like I said, this little switch there is designed so you can choose which of the power districts runs through the ramp meter. So you'll both get power and current for each of them. And then the way this thing's built out, the little window here will actually open up, and inside here is going to be the two boosters and then the relays for the switching of the booster power. So the problem is when I don't have a basement that's the size of what David has, and since I'm not really willing to move to Michigan, I went to university in Michigan. I've lived in Michigan. I remember there was 6 weeks when I was at GMI. GMI was a 6-week on, 6-week work program. So you go to school for 6 weeks and work for 6 weeks. And the site I was in, I had the 6 weeks in Michigan right after Christmas. So would fly to Michigan right after New Year's and be in Michigan for, till the middle of February. And there was 6 weeks where it never got above 32 degrees. Now, clearly that's not happening any longer, but this was a number of years ago.
Phil, it was below 26 degrees Fahrenheit all 4 days that we were here, and it dipped down to 6 degrees Fahrenheit on the nighttime.
Exactly. And after about 2 or 3 years, I got to the point where I said, this is the only advantage I had was that because I lived in a fraternity house and I had to drive to school was didn't own a car, didn't have a car out there. So the guys who owned cars had to go out and start their cars and warm them up. So by the time I went out and got in the car, it was warm. I always remember that too. And that remote car start feature that we all in California say, why would you want that? There actually is a reason that people want it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Hey guys, I grew up in Winnipeg. It didn't get above 0 Fahrenheit for 2 months.
Yeah.
So getting above freezing was unheard of when I was, yeah. And you had to start your car because otherwise it froze. It would freeze the antifreeze. So Saginaw is the tropics as far as I was concerned. Yeah.
Yeah, that was like when I went to Calgary, and I was in Calgary and I was in the parking lot at the company building I was at. And between every 2 stalls in the parking lot, there's a little stand with a power outlets for the block heaters. And I kind of asked one of the guys, I said, so just out of curiosity, how often do you have to use those? He said, about a month out of the year, you got to use them. And I said, you know what I heard? I heard a month out of the year, if you're driving and your car dies, you die.
That's right.
Just as a practical thing, I mean, it's a pretty scary environment to be in where you got to plug your car in to keep it warm. Because, if you're out in the middle of nowhere and your car dies, you're in real deep yogurt. This was pre cell phone days, by the way. But it's an interesting, it's a different environment to live in. Of course, here we get to live with the fires. So.
And earthquakes.
Well, yeah, the one that's interesting is the New Madrid one, which is actually the one in the middle of the country. So
yeah. Well,
So anybody else got any interesting modeling? I was going to show some pictures of. I'm actually getting the 2 modules I'm building. I'm getting all the turnouts mounted and that. I was going to show some pictures of it. I just realized I just literally realized for the past N number of years I've used this. I don't know if anybody has one of those. This side plugs into a Apple Lightning connector, and this side plugs into your PC. And it's a great way to move files from your phone to your PC because I don't have a Mac. And Apple's got, we have these walled gardens in terms of moving stuff around. And I just realized I bought a new iPhone, and my new iPhone has a USB connector, and so there's really no way to plug my Lightning connector into my USB connector, and I've got to go figure out how to do that. I've got to go figure out
USB-C to the one that's into your computer, which should be what? Is it your computer USB-C?
But here's the thing: is the problem is I've got to see if I can just treat this like a memory. That's actually an interesting question because I've actually had this thing where for years I have two computers. I have the computer we're on, which is my quote unquote work computer, and then we have a family computer which is behind me. And the computer behind me has Apple on it, and this computer has Google on it. And the reason I did that was I didn't want to have any company have access to all my information, personal and
Right.
work. So I kind of
Yeah.
bifurcated it. So I've actually kept Apple off of this computer and I've kept Google off of the other computer.
Yeah.
So, because I
It's a
figure either of
pain.
these companies, they track everything you do, and the more you let them into your computer, the more they know about you.
Yeah, that's for sure. Speaking of knowing about things, Bob, newsletter news. Mr. Gardine, what news?
What news? Well, I can say that I am ecstatic to actually have an operational railroad.
All right.
Well, but
Um,
you go ahead.
so the main I'm commuting back and forth between the Bay Area and LA right now.
Yeah.
And so I've been able I'm at the point where I'm playing with my trains with my wife and daughter.
All right.
And one of the things that I did that I'm continuing to work on, I'll just sort of show, is figuring out how to do turnout controls on my layout. And there's a whole bunch of different ideas about, Phil has push buttons on the top of his module. I want to sort of show you my Mark I version. If I rotate this down, I can sort of get this over here. So right here, I have I took a photograph of, I don't know if you guys can see that very well. I took a photograph of my module because I can rotate it on the side. I can rotate my module to the side, right? So I can rotate that 90 degrees. So I rotated the module, took a photograph of it, put it in Photoshop, and then I inserted brass screws at basically at the points, and those connect to the an NC button board. And then I made a little ground
Ah,
doohickey that I can touch to the screws. And it's a very easy way for my daughter. It's very easy to figure out how to use this. So this is Mark I. The second version I'm going to do is going to replace the screws with a brass tube that's large enough to hold an LED. And
mm,
so the LED is going to be recessed. And when I touch the screw or the brass tube, the turnout will move, and then I'll get an indicator light on the little layout diagram. So that's. But in the meantime, I've been playing around with this, and this has been working really well. And I'm basically working on dealing with a couple of minor track anomalies to make sure that basically nothing derails, but it doesn't quite run as smoothly as I want. And so I'm just continuing to work on it. I just got I wired up the switch on my 2x4 foot CCC-LN30 module that wires into the into my NCE switch controller. And for that, I don't use the my little switch panel, but I can basically flick the switch using the accessory command on my power cab. So I'm at the point where I'm about to. I have a slight sway issue with my module and a little bit of a. I'm supporting it by the ends, not by the middle. So I need to do some. I have an 1/8 of an inch of droop in the middle, which doesn't seem like much, but with a couple of my free rolling cars, they don't sit.
mm.
So I'm going to fix that before I do any further work. That's next week's project.
I had a similar issue. I built these wings for my on the ON30 where they bolt onto a module, just a sheet of plywood that ran out about 3 feet, 3.5 feet, and has sidings on it. And one of them was great. One of them had a little twist, little dip in it. And what I did was I put a block of wood underneath it and ran a cable underneath it like a truss rod and put a tie and just lifted it, and you can just adjust it up till it's perfect. So it actually turns out if you've got a little sag in the middle, you just put a block there and then run a thin buy you can buy a 16th inch cable for virtually nothing at Home Depot, and you put a couple of eye bolts in, run it through, and then put one of those turnbuckles on it in the middle and just turn it up until it pulls it up level, and it's now level, and it's very railroad prototypical as a mechanism.
Great
Yeah.
idea.
No, it is, because otherwise you got to try to put a piece of wood there to block it. But if you actually do that, you can actually adjust it till you just get it perfect, and then it's right where it is. Works out really well. So it's a great way. Using the prototype's a great way to solve that. That's the same problem they had. And that was the interesting thing is, it's interesting that solutions in one area can be applied in other areas, right? We were telling the story of going to the shops, the original Central Pacific shops, which are at the back of the SP shops up in Sacramento. When you look at them, the whole building was built like tunnel portals and bridge trusses. I mean, the framing is all tunnel portals when you actually look at it, and the roofs and everything else is all just like bridge trusses. Because clearly the guys who were building that's what they knew how to build. So when they asked to build a big building, they built it just like they built tunnels and bridge trusses.
Yeah,
Which
I
thought was,
didn't know I had a problem until I started playing around and switching trains, because if I have a 5-car train, there's enough five cars together, there's enough rolling resistance, and only one of the two of the cars roll freely enough so that I had to actually spot a car, one of the specific cars at a specific place, and then it would roll. So I actually didn't realize I had a sag until I started playing around and operating the trains.
Yep.
Or whoops.
Yeah.
Well, and that rolling trains is a challenge. I know one of the things we figured out at the ACCRS is there's a lot of the track is not really very level, and you start getting really free rolling cars, and all of a sudden things just start rolling away. I mean, it's like you think this track is level because it to the eye, we're just not that good at picking it up. Our eyes are not that good. But you put a car on it, all of a sudden this thing you think is level, and the car is just shooting off 20 feet away to the left. So
Some of the guys' passenger cars have roller bearings on the axles, and if you just blow at them gently, they move. Very, very free rolling. But that's whoops. Charlie, so what are you modeling these weeks? Again, been able to get your hands on some models?
Well, I don't have anything handy here, but I've been. Some of you guys met George Carpenter. He was talking. He gave a talk here a few years ago about being a CN guy in Alberta. But so he's an older guy, and he ended up with two. What was the name? I can't remember that, but very old cadmium and zinc cast models of Montreal Locomotive Works, and they were partly assembled. And he wanted them painted, and his guy that normally does his painting said, if you paint them, they'll warp. And I thought, that doesn't make any sense to me. So I've been working on them, and actually maybe I should go and get them. They're in another room, but I've worked with Mark Schutzer because I've got some photos. George has tens of thousands of photos, and he's got both an RS-18 Montreal Locomotive Work Alco RS-18 and Elco RS-10 that I've been trying to detail. So the difficulty, there's an interesting contrast. The problem is the castings are not bad, but they're not great. They're about 40 years old, so the quality of the castings aren't great. So I want to kind of have the details match so that they don't stand out. So what I've got to do is I've got to do some specialty work. I've milled out some part of the metal, and I'm creating a new set of car body filters. So to match the pattern. So the reason I find this interesting is I went to the trouble of getting a resin 3D printer because I found that I tried to scratch build the filters, but I'm working with 10,000 thick pieces of and I just I can't get things really square. I've tried to make jigs. They look like shit. So I decided George is a really nice guy, and I decided I wanted to do the best job I can. So I've decided I'm going to 3D print these tiny little details, And so I was working with Rick Fortin. Rick has got a pretty high quality 3D printer. He recommended the one to get, so I bought it. And that's what I'm working on right now. I'm trying to learn how to use the 3D printer to print these car body filters. And when I get that, the other thing I'm trying to do, actually, I don't know. I've asked here before. I'm trying to know if anybody here in the NMRA group knows how to mix paints to match paint colors. I've tried doing it, and my wife actually does graphic design, and she jokes and says, if you want an ounce of mixed paint, by the time she's done, it's a gallon, right? Because you keep trying to get things to match. So George has given me paint chips because there were two. There's a actually, I've got the photo here somewhere if I can dig it up quickly.
While you're digging, Phil, Fran Foley, and a few other folks are fairly deep down the 3D printing rabbit hole. So don't bang your head on it too much by just solely by yourself. You may find there's some resources in the group that can help you over some of the humps. I'm volunteering you, Phil.
Well, actually, I know Phil has done it, and also Rick Fortin has done a lot of 3D printing with in resin. So let me just see. I can probably dig something up because it's actually an interesting. I actually like the paint scheme. If I can.
Yeah, there's some groups on groups.io and things that are helpful for 3D printing.
Oh yeah.
Well,
I've been doing. Yeah, I've participated in those, and I've actually been. Where did I go here now? I've actually been looking at a lot of videos on how to do things, and I learned a lot about the 3D printer, which I think is great. I just need to, let's see here.
What 3D printer did you get?
I ended up getting an Anycubic. An Anycubic. If I do this.
Anycubic has deals a lot of the times, and they're the thing about the resin printers is the filament printers are a physical process machine.
Yeah, so you can see it in the background. I've got it here in my office. Yeah. So it's so interesting. It's a 10-inch 14K resolution. So supposedly I can get down to resolution down to 20 microns, which is a quarter of a thousandth of an inch. Well, and
that's the thing that's so interesting, right? Is the resin printers, the process is actually one that is driven by manufacturing that comes out of the computer industry.
Exactly.
And so the cost structure, the beauty of resin is that the resolution and the cost of the printers at a resolution continues to drop essentially almost at Moore's law, right? So you can get twice as good a printer, every 18 months kind of thing.
I thought you needed to have crazy good ventilation and couldn't do this inside the house.
Well, yes and no. So yes, the resins can be toxic. No. So I've done a couple of things. One is I've got the Pro version, which Rick doesn't have. So it has inside the box, there's a filter. So it does two things. It heats the inside of the chamber so that you can always work at a constant temperature, and it cycles air through, and there's a carbon filter that deals with the fumes. And the second thing is I've found a resin from Anycubic, which is a plant-based resin, which is odorless. So that's where I'm going to try. I've got it in my office here, and I'll see if it'll actually work.
So the only person I've ever spent a lot of time around who does resin printing is Fran. And Fran's comment about it was really simple, and it's almost discouraging you from buying one. He said basically, there are three considerations to resin printing. The first is you have to do it in a place where you're not worried about it totally destroying the location. He said you will get resin all over everything. Like if you've got it on a table, you're going to get resin on the floor in front of the table, and if it's rug, it's going to be ruined. He said the second thing is any clothing you wear, you have to be planned on that it'll be ruined. And then the third is that when you do it, you have to make sure you've got gloves, etc. on, He didn't talk as much about the ventilation and wearing, wearing, a breathing apparatus, but more that you got to wear gloves because if you get the resin on you, it's a mess too. But it's just more from not from a
Well, it
health
is.
perspective. It's very messy stuff.
Yeah, it is. It is definitely messy stuff. No question about it. I've got gloves. I've got disposable
Yep.
gloves. I've got. I'm
Did
just
you
looking through
buy
my.
did you buy a washer too?
No, I don't have the washer yet. Um, this is something that Rick has convinced me that I need to get. I'll probably get a washer. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold here. Sorry about that. So we'll see. But like I say, part of it has to do with the amount of volume of resin that you're doing and the size of the stuff that you're printing, and
Right.
we'll find out. I hope I don't get too discouraged. But anyway, here's the. Let me just share this. There, you should be able to see this.
Yep.
And so this is
Wow.
So this is an RS-18, and this is the one I'm trying to mimic. And the models the models don't have this. I don't know if you can see my cursor. You should be able to, but see, there's these car body filters here, the ones that you see here, 1, 2, 3. There's actually 2 of them here and here. There's on the RS-18 Alcos, there were 5 of them. These were, when Montreal Locomotive Works did these were modified. They were removed, and a much larger 3-body filter was put in here. And so this is what I'm trying to do. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get the. I've got on another photo. Here's a photo of the filters. So this is what I'm trying to print, is the frame and then the 3 filters. You can see basically these filters are set inside. So that's what I'm trying to reproduce on the printer. So heaven forbid if I can, these are not going to be very, very big. What I'm going to do is I'm going to print the frame. These are the lift out tabs, I assume, for the filters to pop them out of this frame. I'm going to print this matrix of reinforcing, and then I'm going to leave the rest blank. I've got mesh that I'm going to put behind it. So what I'll do is I'll lay down a base, put the mesh down, and put this frame on top of the mesh. And that should allow me to create these filters pretty well, so I can get this look. And then this orange, I'm trying to get, this is the color. I've got 3 different Canadian National so-called red orange number 13, and they're all 3 slightly different from 3 different providers. And one of them is actually the Canadian National Historic Society had, the special interest group had a scale coat print or prepare paint. And I've actually got a bottle of it, but it doesn't match the color on the paint chip either. So I've got to try and decide whether or not that's good enough, and convince George that the Canadian National Historical Society orange is close enough. But I think this is a striking looking locomotive, and should be fun to try and get it. Once I get, the other thing I'm doing, I should put that photo back up now that I think about it, is the other thing that's interesting about this locomotive. If you look at the windows, these are winterized windows. You see that they put a greenhouse window over the window here. And trying to duplicate those is going to be an issue as well. Because what they do, I guess, in the winter is, you see the sunshade is removed, and the mirrors, there's wind deflectors on either side here, they're removed, and they put this shadow box or window box, greenhouse type box on there, I guess, so that the engineer can look out the window without having to stick his head into the 30 below zero weather. And so I'm able to reproduce these. So that's another detail that's going to be interesting to duplicate. So this has been a fun project. And actually part of the fun, much to my surprise, has been researching the whole thing, looking at the photos, I've got engineering drawings and so on to try and duplicate this as closely as I can. So that's what I've been working on for the last couple of months. And hopefully George will be happy with the results.
Now
the other thing I'm worried about. Go ahead.
You're starting then with somebody's model of the locomotive, and you're just kit bashing and modifying.
Yeah. Hang on one second. What the heck? I'm
That's
just going to run to my train room and grab it.
all right. Yeah, it's a challenge to model when your prototype isn't really offered, and then you have to really get to work.
Right. Yeah, I'm just in what is the name of this company here? I'm in my train room now. I'm just looking at the name of the manufacturer here.
You realize, of
Tiger
course,
Valley.
sir, you're gonna have to set your camera up sometime so you can show us your train room.
Well, the reason I don't is because it looks like shit right now. So I'm I'm too embarrassed. I'd have to clean it up. But yeah, here's the casting.
Ah,
So okay, and so you can see there's some decent detail on it.
mm-hmm.
And so so this one I've already um, um, blasted. Basically, I got air eraser. I bead blasted it to get because there's some corrosion and some
Yeah.
oxidation on it, and so I cleaned it up and I primed it. So that way I feel more comfortable handling it with my fingers because it's according to the manufacturer, Tiger Valley models I'd never heard of. I don't know if anybody else has heard of them. So he actually gave me the boxes, and there's the purchase. I saw the invoice. They're 40 years old, so
Yeah.
they've been sitting in a box for 40 years. So I bead blasted the corrosion off, and I primed it so I can handle it. And then Mark Schutzer and I milled out the spot for the filters, and
Mm.
so that's what I'm doing, and I'm trying to add as much detail as I can, and then we'll paint them up. The nice thing is I've primed it and this thing hasn't warped. So I don't know why his painter thinks they're going to warp. And so now I'm just trying to get that orange color
Hmm.
matched.
Did you look at True Color at all?
Oh yeah, I could show you that
Because
in my train room.
yeah, but so True Color, the reason I asked that was that True Color has basically a Canadian national
Yep,
orange,
yep, I've got that one.
and then they have a red orange.
Yeah, they've got both of
And,
those.
and it would seem to me that those two there, if you wanted a more reddish than this one, you could go to this and mix
Yeah,
just a little bit of it in, to figure it
I,
out.
I,
But
I might try that. What I've painted is I got a little piece of metal, square, about an inch square, just to
yep,
polish it up, primed it, and painted it with the SIG, the Canadian. I mean, I know that the CN historical group, they contracted with Scale Coat a number of years ago to produce pretty accurate, come from CN paint chips colors. And so I
Hmm.
actually have a bottle of the SIG Scale Coat, number orange, red orange, number 13 or whatever, which is what the spec is. But what's interesting is there's two of them. They're both also number 13, but one was from that was used from 1959 or 1960 through 1964, and then the next number 13, they were slightly different. And I've got the paint chip from George, as I said to George, how do you know that this paint chip, which is on a piece of paper, is accurate enough, right? Should I try to match that? And so what I'm going to do is
well,
I'm just painted up his test piece with the
scale
SIG's
coat.
color, the Scale Coat,
Yeah.
and I need to put some semi-gloss on it because he wants it to look like it came out of the factory. He has dozens and dozens of models. He's basically got a model of every locomotive that CN ever owned, steam and diesel.
Oh my.
And he's got a display in his home in Palo Alto. And in fact, I've talked about, I mean, he's in his mid to late 80s, and he's not going to be around forever. It's like, what are you going to do with this collection? And he's got a collection of 100,000 photos or something,
Oh.
which is all indexed, by the way. They're all indexed and digitized. So he gave me a thumb drive with his entire diesel photo collection. So if I want to model, I mean, this one that I'm looking at, 3704, I mean, it's a particular class. It's not just an RS-18, it's an RS-18 of a certain class. I've got 100 photos of just of that class alone to get, if you want details. So I've actually had fun doing research. I never thought I'd get into research, but I've actually had a blast trying to realize all of the different details and how to recreate them.
Charlie, one thing
Yeah.
occurs to me. You showed us that picture, and what I've observed is the color of paint also depends on the light under which
Yep.
it is being viewed. Is it afternoon sun? Is it morning sun? And so I don't know if you can ever,
Well, that's actually a good point, right? Because when I look at this photo here, see, notice this is winter, all right?
Right.
And the sun angle in Canada is different depending
yes.
on whether it's summer or winter, and the amount of UV that's in the light is different.
Well, you
because
can tell the sun angle if you look on the engine
yeah,
at the shadow
yeah,
of
exactly, of the rail here. Yeah.
of the railing,
Yep.
and you can
Oh, yeah.
see that it's a fairly low sun. It's at about 45 degrees up in the sky, and
Exactly.
it's bright sunlight. I mean,
Yeah.
you look at the reflection right above the 304. Those engines were not painted glossy. They were not super glossy, but you're getting a real bright sun reflection right there.
Well, yeah, like if you look around the numbers here, you can see the gloss. You see reflecting off the curve of the right, and so that's why I'm going to put a semi-gloss paint on it, on the paint chip, and see if you like, and I've got the paint chips themselves. I got the two different colors, the two number 13s. The SIG stuff comes really close to one of them. So
I
as
would
far as
just
I'm
say
concerned,
that's the one that applies.
Declare
What's the color
victory and run
temperature?
away.
yeah, exactly.
What's the
You
color
know, the-
temperature of the lights in your modeling area?
Well,
But that doesn't. It's
I
the
don't-
light.
Because that's going to change your impression of what the color of your paint
Well,
is. So
absolutely, and I don't use those to check. I go outside to check the paint match, and inside I've got most of the house here. I put in 5,000 Kelvin daylight bulbs. I don't like the soft white, blah blah blah. And so if I do it indoors, I do it under the 5K Kelvin, 5,000 Kelvin lamps to try and match it. Now, of course, in his room is where his displays are. It's just a bedroom in his home with some natural light and some incandescent stuff. So things look different in his room as well. So what the hell, I think this will be close enough. And and I'm trying to think of how many people are going to go. And the other models he has in there, most of them are brass collector items, and he's had them professionally painted. He's paid some guy $1,000 a piece to have these things painted.
Hey.
And so my paint job, I told George, said, well, what am I going to charge you? What do you want to charge me for that? I said, George, I'm doing this because this is a fun project. I'm not going to, if you cover the cost of the paint, I'm more than happy. So I'm not going to try and compete my paint jobs with a professional, but I think I can recreate this pretty well because the masking on this is pretty straightforward, and I've got I've got the airbrush and I've got everything I need to do it. So hopefully I got my fingers crossed that it comes out looking good.
I suspect with the care you're taking that it will look really good.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
And then you see when you get it all done, you can sneak it into the contest.
Oh, don't even talk to me. Don't even talk to me about it.
One last question. What mechanism is under there?
It's an open. In fact, I checked it. The motors were still working. He doesn't care if it runs.
Oh, okay.
And so I'm not gonna convert it to DCC, at least at this point. He doesn't even care if it runs. They're all static displays, but it's an open frame motor.
Yeah.
With a flywheel. So it's like it looks like an old Athearn drive. And actually, I've got some Hobbytown RS3s. I don't know if you guys remember the Hobbytown that are also 40 years old. I've got, and it looks a very, very similar type, open frame motor with a flywheel, and little plastic U joints to drive the. So it would be nice. My kind of hope is that when George passes, and I got my fingers crossed that he goes before I do, on that assumption, since he's older than I am, that he might say, "Hey, when I go, you can have these two out of my display case." So now the downside of that is the railroad I'm modeling didn't use RS-18s or RS-10s. Those were East Coast Canada, and I'm West Coast Western or Midwest Canada. But what the hell? And also this paint job that I showed you is early 1960s with the CN noodle and the zebra stripes. So this was around 64, 65 was that case. And my railroad is 59. But what the hell? If I do get these models, I would run them anyway. What the hell? Because they kind of mean a lot. George is a good fellow, and I think I would enjoy running them. And I'll take them over. I operate regularly at Dave Lovelace's, and he's 1956 or something. So I'd bring him over and run them anyway.
Yeah.
Hey guys, I got to run. Good
it is time. Good to see you, Bob.
Take care.
I think it's getting to be time. Actually, the other thing you always can do with something like that is replace the mechanism too at some point if it becomes an issue.
Well, I was working with, so Schutzer has shown me how to, I can't believe how cheap these are. I've got a bunch of them now. These are sealed motors, electric motors, CAN motors that are used to operate the rear view mirrors on a car, the zip, zip, zip. And so they're in huge volume. They're dirt cheap. They're like $7 or $8 a piece or $10 or whatever. And he's adapted them, and he's shown me how to adapt them to replace. They're tiny to replace the open frame motors on my hobby towns.
Yeah.
So I haven't done that yet, but I got the motors, and if it works out, and I can convert them to DCC easy enough because you pull the motor out, isolate it. I'll convert it to DCC. I can mill out a little bit of space. Those things are heavy. This Tiger Valley models and the hobby towns they're cast metal. They're heavy as hell. So I can probably cast out enough of the frame to put a DCC decoder in there, and I'll probably put sound in them too.
All right. You've got some interesting modeling ahead of you.
Well, yeah. What I need is modeling time that I don't have enough of. So, but that's a project in my future. But I want to finish these for George first. That's kind of what I'm working on now.
All right. Well, I have to go and help Dave. I have to trim Dad's beard, Susie's dad's beard and stuff. We're taking him to his 93rd birthday gathering with the family this evening. So I have to get out of here and go get him neatened up. Phil, thank you for hosting.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one. We will see you all. We will see you all in a week.
Okay.
Well, I'll see you at Rick's.
2 weeks.
I'll see you at Rick's.
Phil, I'll be at Rick's on Saturday next week. See you there.
I'll see you next week. Yeah.
All right, everybody.
Have a good one,
Be
guys.
well. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye now.